Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Virginia, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Dr. Val?
I'm doing well. How is the start of the new church semester going?
It's going well. Yeah, we've had a few different conversations. We were talking just now before we started recording about the new year, our new ministry year. So we just started Awana, which has been awesome. Our Wednesday night numbers have doubled from last year with starting Awana.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so it's exciting, but also it has all those challenges that come with really sudden growth and unexpected growth. And I mean, we expected it to be popular and we expected it to, have more kids than last year, but we didn't quite expect just how well received it's been. So it's been good. And it's been a lot.
Yes. It's just one of those amazing things where you're so excited that it's going well and that there are a lot of people coming and participating. And at the same time, it's, wow, there's a lot of people coming and participating.
Yes.
It takes a little while to get into a rhythm and for volunteers, especially with a new program, to get into a rhythm. But it sounds like it's going good.
Yeah, it is. And the kids too. And that's one of the things too that I've been trying to share with our volunteers. I'm like, the kids are learning this for the first time too. It's sort of like, the majority of our volunteers, we do have a few, who have done it before, but the majority of our volunteers, the majority of our kids, it's sort of like everyone's going through this learning curve, but we're going to get through it. So
it's all going to be good. It's all going to be good. Well, we are very excited for the opportunity to get together and talk and the opportunity to share with you today. We have a topic that we hope is going to be beneficial, something that's going to be useful. I know for me, the beginning of my ministry, really early on, especially, I served in some smaller churches as the volunteer children's minister. And these churches were very small and really did not have a budget for children's ministry. Most of those churches had a smaller number of kids. So we weren't talking, huge children's ministry with no budget, but we were talking children's ministry with no budget. And so what we thought we would talk today about how you can do children's ministry with a smaller budget, because I have learned from experience it is possible. You can do children's ministry with all different sizes of budgets. And so we just thought that we might go through some of the things that we've learned over the years on how we can find creative ways to do children's ministry when we don't necessarily have a big budget to do children's ministry with. When you are responsible for a ministry, whether it has a huge budget or whether it has a very tiny budget, and whether or not you are paid staff or whether you're volunteer staff, you are still responsible for a budget. And so many times when I'm talking with leaders and I'll start to ask them questions about, the materials that they use and what they get. And so many times if they have a smaller budget or if the church doesn't run a budget itself and, you're kind of trying to run this ministry on a very tight, amount of money, a lot of times I talk to people that don't actually keep up with it. They don't keep up with an actual budget itself because they don't feel like they have one. So they don't feel like they need one. And so the very first thing that I recommend if you are struggling with a very small budget and trying to run a children's ministry is to actually create a budget. Think through what your top priorities are for the ministry and what the ministry needs. And I know that it's really easy to say, well, I don't have any money, so there's not really a budget. But you do want to sit down and think through, okay, to be able to run this ministry, to be able to do what I need to do, I need to think through, what do I need and what supplies do I have to have and what am I looking at, so that you can decide what are your top priorities. Because a lot of times we look at children's ministry and think we need all of the bells and whistles
Mm.
to be able to do everything. But
Yeah.
honestly, no church ever has enough money to do what they want. It doesn't matter if you have a very small amount of money or if you have been given a huge budget for your children's ministry. There is still never enough money for everything we could do if we
Mm.
wanted to.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm gonna piggyback off of that. One, creating your budget and tracking your spending. So, one thought with creating a budget, like you're saying, is figure out what it is that you need, what you need the most. How much your curriculum would cost, how
Mhm.
much any sort of non-negotiable supplies would cost. If the kids need
Right,
pencils to do their activity pages, figuring out what those non-negotiables are, and then tracking either what you personally are spending, if you feel like if you're having to spend it out of your own pocket,
right,
or what you're asking people to donate,
mhm,
because that gives you such a stronger case
right,
to go to your church leadership, whatever that process is, and be like, okay, look, like, this is what we need, this is what people are donating, or this is what I'm buying out of my own pocket.
right,
And we need, some either more money or money,
mhm,
period,
right, right,
set aside for our children's ministry. And
right,
so having that concrete data helps you build that
mhm,
argument for your ministry to, the church as a whole, or whoever it is that's making these decisions and guiding things around the budget.
right,
Um, and then also, like you were saying too, thinking through non-negotiables and being intentional about what really matters in
mhm,
in children's ministry. Just
right,
like what you're saying, like, we don't have to keep up with the church down the street, but the things that are most important, the things that are going to help children learn the Bible, that are going to
mhm,
help you equip parents, those type things, like curriculum,
mhm,
materials, resources.
mhm,
Those are the important things. And I think also demonstrating that to your finance committee, your leaders of the church, whoever, that
right,
I'm not asking for this money because I want, 50 billion crayons. And you may need
right,
some crayons,
right,
but you're
right,
like, I'm not spending this, like, I'm spending this on important things
right,
that are going to disciple kids, that are going to encourage and equip parents. And
mhm,
so I think having a vision, and then, having sort of that budget and tracking
right,
what's being spent, having that concrete data
mhm,
really helps support your case to the leadership at your church.
right. I think it's really important, especially as you were saying, if you are spending money out of your own pocket. I've
Mhm.
worked with many children's ministers that had the means to be able to help the ministry as
Mhm.
they were serving, and they considered that part of their giving. It was part of their
Mhm.
tithing. It was part of their offering, however they wanted to look at that. But they also just, felt like that they wanted to be able to support
Mhm.
the ministry and do this. And one of the things that I would often remind them is that you want to make sure you keep great records with that, not because you want to be reimbursed, not because you want the credit for, for giving, not because you want people to know how much you give, but because you do need to make sure that the church staff, the finance committee, that the next person coming in after you is aware you
Mhm.
did this ministry through the giving that you did so that they understand where that came from, because the next person coming in may not be able to do that. And you don't want your finance committee, you don't want your budget team, you don't want your pastor and church staff to think, oh, well, she was able to do all of these things with this really tiny amount of money, not realizing that you were actually funding a lot of those extra things. And so that's why
Right.
it's really important that you do keep a really great budget and a really great record of where things come from, so that you can go and say, you know what, I did not mind putting this money in, but I just need to make you aware the reason why this event was what it was is because I supplemented it in this way. And
Right.
often people don't want to do that because they think, well, I'm not trying to be, and it's not trying to be boastful and it's not trying to be prideful. It's just giving everyone a realistic view so that the next person coming in isn't told, well, Virginia was able to do this huge event with just this amount of money when it's really not possible. So you want to
Yeah.
make sure that you do keep a really good record of that.
Mhm.
But it's exactly what you said. You wanna think about important, not flashy. Kids get flashy in a lot of different places. They
Mhm.
can get flashy in a lot of different areas of their life. You know, the church is the one place where they're gonna hear the word of God, they're gonna learn the word of God, they're gonna have that time, build those relationships. That's what's important. So we wanna make sure that we are focusing our budget on the things that are important and not feel guilty if we're not doing all of the bells and whistles,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's okay. That's not what you've been called to do. That's not what you're there for. And hopefully, as your church grows, as your ministry grows, your budget's going to grow and you're going to be able to do
Mhm.
some different things. But it's like you said, you really want to focus on what's important.
And I'll say this too, and you can tell me if you've heard this as well. And this is one of those things that I've heard, and I don't know where it originated from. Probably some seminary textbook or something. I don't know. But that your age graded ministries
Mhm.
should each receive 1 to 2% of the overall church budget. That's what I've heard. Have you heard
Mhm.
anything like that before
It's
or
something
as
similar,
well?
yes. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, it varies so much in ministry.
Mhm.
So many people think, well, the kids need less, and so sometimes they will, every church budget is different. So you never
Right.
find a normal, like this is the basic amount, but that sounds, that sounds pretty
Mhm.
standard.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what I've heard. Just like 1 to 2% for depending on how you divide it up, your preschool and kids, or your preschool gets 1 to 2%, kids gets 1 to 2%, students get 1 to 2%, or
Mhm.
however that's divided up in your church. And again, that's not a set amount, that's a
Right.
percentage of whatever your particular church's budget
Mhm.
is.
Right. Right.
Um, and so I thought that was very interesting as well.
Right. Well, and I think it's very important that you are the champion for the children's
Mhm.
ministry, for the preschool and children's
Yes.
ministry. And
Yes.
so it is very easy that if you don't speak up, that it's going to be overlooked, because the church
Mhm.
ministries, there are so many and they all need a piece of that budget. And
Mhm.
so you want to make sure that you are prepared with the data that you need to
Mhm.
be able to make your case in front of the finance committee, to your budgeting committee, to whoever you respond to for the budget itself. Even if you are in a volunteer position, that is
Mhm.
still your responsibility to be able to come forward and say, this is the number of preschoolers we have, this is the number of children we have, these are the resources that we need, this is what we have, this is what we don't have, and be prepared, to really fight for what your ministry needs. And that means that you do need to be prepared with numbers. And so many
Yeah.
times, like for me, math, numbers, finance, that is one of my least favorite areas to deal with. Uh,
Same.
completely. But
Oh.
I found that it was very necessary for
Mhm.
me to keep up with printing costs and
Mhm.
and publishing costs and how much things, like I really tried to make sure that when I was writing out a budget that I included the cost of living increases, the
Mhm.
increases, an increase of cost each year.
Mhm.
and made sure that I was, familiar with those numbers so that I could state those numbers as I was talking about, well, this is why I'm requesting more money this year. This
Mhm.
is why,
Mhm.
and then also one of the big things that I made sure that I did as well was to, if I didn't use all of my budgeted money for a reason, I would explain why I didn't and why I needed that to continue
Mm.
to be given, because a lot of times they would say, well, if you didn't use this amount for VBS, then you don't need that amount for the next year. And I would really need to have my answer as to why I did not spend that, but why I
Mhm.
still need that in my budget in case I do need it,
Mhm.
or because we didn't do this event this year, but we're going to be doing it next year.
Mhm.
It is very important to keep up with every line item on your budget and think
Mhm.
through what you've used and how you've used it, and why you've used it, because many churches do different things. A lot of times I would have in a church, the money would roll over to the next fiscal year if I
Mhm.
didn't use something. Sometimes it did not. Sometimes
Mhm.
the way the church set it up, it automatically rolled back into the main budget. And then I started over again with my budget. So you want to be very familiar with what's going to happen to your budgeted money if you do not use it all in a year. Those kinds of things are important for you to
Mhm.
have to keep up with. And it's
Mhm.
definitely not fun, but it's necessary.
It is. It is. And in thinking too about advocating for your ministry, one of the ways to think about it as well is with your finance committee or whoever it is that does this. Are there any kids on the finance committee?
Mhm.
No, they're all adults.
Right.
Are there adults who are a part of the music ministry on the finance committee? Probably a part of the missions or the adult Bible study groups or the women's ministry? Probably. And so your finance committee isn't going to have kids on it
Mhm.
like many of your other ministries do that
Right.
are run and supported and for adults.
Mhm.
And so one, that's why you need to be the advocate, is that there may not naturally be one there, but then
Mhm.
two, it is a good thing to be aware of whenever you are nominating new people for this year's
Right.
finance committee, trying to get a sort of representative sample from the church of not everyone on the finance committee is all from the music ministry,
Right. Right.
or that kind of thing. So even just having someone who's involved in your ministry on that committee can be helpful, because they can, at times when you're not around,
Mhm.
provide insight and explanations for why things are the way that they are or whatever. Um, and they can just inform that committee
Right.
just because they're there and they're easily available and they know what's going on in the children's ministry.
Mhm.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why children's ministry, student ministry will sometimes get overlooked in these meetings, is because you've got a bunch of grown-ups who care about their own stuff
Right.
and
Right.
you don't always have someone there who can advocate for the kids ministry in the
Right.
way that grown-ups can advocate for their own ministries.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that people just don't realize the amount of resources that are needed for
Mm.
children's ministry, because again, when you're working with an adult ministry class, as long as you have a teacher's a
Mhm.
leader guide, that's usually all you really need in a class.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you're looking at the children's ministry leader guide, you're looking at crayons and paper and construction paper and
Yeah.
all of these things that have to go along with it. And so it definitely
Mhm.
does require a lot more
Mhm.
material, and it just requires a lot more stuff, because kids just require stuff. And
Right.
so we have to make sure that the adults are aware of that, because they may not be, if they don't serve in
Right.
children's ministry. Like you said, if they don't have kids in children's ministry,
Mhm.
they may not exactly realize what you do. And so
Mhm.
that's why it's really important to be the voice, to be the one that
Mhm.
is out there, fighting for that extra. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do when we're working on a tight budget that might help us be able to get some resources that we might not be able to afford through our budget, and just talk a little bit about some ways that maybe you can save some of your budgeted money for the areas that you need. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier was prioritizing your materials.
Mhm.
I know getting material from a publisher can be expensive.
Mhm.
I also know that when you're looking at material, there's so many extra things that seem to
Mm.
need to be purchased because we have the leader guide and you have a kit and then you have the student book and then you have,
Mhm.
the coloring pages, or you have all of these extra things
Mhm.
that are needed. And one of the things that I always try to remind myself is more so than giving treats for my teachers or thanking them through, goodies or food or parties, that the things that we can give them, the tools that we can provide for them to have
Mhm.
a more successful teaching experience is more important than anything else. And so the one thing that I always did try to purchase was the leader guide. I always
Mhm.
felt like if I at least had the leader guide, then I knew that the teachers would have a basic outline for how they could lead the class to have a successful experience. And
Mhm.
I know that that means that they might not necessarily have the posters and the games or the little extras and those kinds of things, which I know are greatly needed and they're so incredibly useful. But honestly, there were many years that I just couldn't afford to
Mhm.
purchase everything to go along with it. So I just made sure that every teacher had the leader guide. So
Mhm.
they had the Bible story, they had a
Mhm.
basic lesson,
Mhm.
and there's so many of those things that come in, the teacher packs and the student books and things that can be created,
Mhm.
in a classroom
Mhm.
experience with a budget that you can kind of,
Right.
that there is the ability to be able to create some of the games and construction
Mhm.
paper instead of the fancy things, or to be able to
Yeah.
find, little ways that you can do, a
Mhm.
crossword on the board together as opposed to
Mhm.
everybody having the book and everybody doing the crossword on the page. So it is possible to still be able to
Mhm.
do so many of the activities that come in the leader guides with
Mhm.
a very limited amount of resources.
Mhm. And this isn't the topic of this episode necessarily, but it's very practical to provide those leader guides and to prioritize that, because then it kind of gives you a little peace and assurance of what's being taught, how it's being taught, how it's being presented. And so that's just such a practical thing of
Right.
um, having that extra layer of confidence
Mhm.
in knowing what's being taught and how it's being taught in your classrooms, and that your teachers aren't kind of adrift without direction or help or guidance.
Right.
So
Well, and it's very difficult, even if you gave them a Bible story and just said, okay, we're
Mhm.
going to be, talking about, Jesus feeding the 5,000, and that's your Bible story for that Sunday. You are asking a lot of people who don't have the
Mhm.
educational training to create activities and to create
Mhm.
the explanation for the story
Mhm.
and the doctrine, detail and all of the
Mhm.
theology and everything that goes
Mhm.
along with it. That's a lot. That's a lot for
Mhm.
anybody to put together because,
Yeah.
we know we work with a lot of children's ministers that actually write all of their own material, and that is not a small task, but it
Mm-mm.
takes time, and it also
Mhm.
takes having that biblical foundation where you
Mhm.
understand your church doctrine, you understand
Mhm.
theology well so that you're able to explain it to a child well. And most of
Mhm.
our volunteers just don't have that
Mhm.
experience.
No,
And
and they
so
have to
when you
understand child development too, so they know how
yeah,
to explain it correctly at each age and, like, yeah,
right.
communicate it well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they need that
Mhm.
information, and so they
Mhm.
need those leader guides.
Mhm.
Something else that I often tell leaders that I don't think that they think about, it doesn't matter if your leader guide has the correct dates on it.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-mm.
if you have and I especially in the small churches where I served,
Mhm.
when I didn't have very much of a budget, I would make sure that the leaders gave the leader guides back to me at the ends of the semester,
Mhm.
and I kept them. I had,
Mhm.
an
Mhm.
organized closet of all of them. And the
Yeah.
reason why I did is because if I had a Wednesday night or if I had a Sunday night, or let's say we had a church event where we were doing childcare for the kids while the adults were doing a Valentine's banquet or something, and I needed material for an evening, I often would go back and pull old leader guides
Mhm.
and I would create lessons from those previous guides from years
Mhm.
before. And it gave me that opportunity to be able to create lessons that I knew were already written age appropriately. They were doctrinally sound, and I could very quickly pull them and create an evening of activities without having to go out and purchase something new just for a
Mhm.
Wednesday night or a Sunday night or a Saturday evening when we were doing an event. And, you know, I they came in very handy for that. So I would often save those leader guides so that I would have them for future use. And also, I will be very honest, there were some churches that were very small where I served, where I had a relationship with other
Mhm.
larger churches in my area. And
Mhm.
when they would finish a semester or at the end of their calendar year, they would donate to me the leader guides, and so I would use the leader guides from the previous years for that year for my
Mhm.
ministry.
Mhm.
And that was a huge help for me because when I couldn't purchase those items, they would donate those for me to be able to use because a lot of times in the larger churches when they do have a budget where they can purchase material each
Mhm.
semester, they do tend to just throw it away because they don't
Mhm.
have the room to save it and they don't
Mhm.
need to save it for anything because they just
Mhm.
purchase, they have the budget to purchase
Mhm.
materials for any event that they need. And so there were always churches that were super kind to help with that. So when
Mhm.
you prioritize making sure you have that material, it's finding ways that you can find that material that you can repurpose and reuse without having to just write everything yourself.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, one of the thoughts that I was thinking about is that, some not all curriculums are like this, but some materials are cyclical to
Mhm,
where you go through the Bible every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, 4 years, whatever that is, whatever that cycle is.
mhm,
And so I know a lot of churches that will use these curriculums that move through the Bible, say chronologically on a
mhm.
cycle. And once they get the whole cycle, whether it's two,
Right.
3, 4 years, whatever it is, they keep it and
Mhm.
then reuse it, for the next 3 years, the next 2 years. And so I think that's another very practical thing that I've seen churches doing is sort of
Mhm.
they get this curriculum knowing that it's going to be a one-time investment for
Right,
several years that they're going to
right.
continue using.
Mhm.
So I think that can be very practical as well.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that you find the same thing in Vacation Bible School material.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be, and sometimes it's actually better if you're not using the same Vacation Bible School material that everybody else is using on the
Yeah.
same year. So
Mhm.
again, if you have a friend in ministry that serves at a larger church, if you have a larger church, or maybe your denomination leadership in your area may have connections that they can help you make with other churches, and possibly you could get their VBS material at the end of this summer, you can use those leader guides from Vacation Bible School
Mhm.
and the themes and the different things and just use it at a different year, or
Mhm.
plan your VBS for the closer to the end of the summer
Mhm.
so that you could, because so many churches are willing to share used material. They are ready to
Mhm.
get all of that out of their building because there's
Mhm.
just with decorations and with so many things, there's just no storage and
Mhm.
people are willing to pass it on. So if you can make those connections early on in the year, because a lot of people do that. So you want to make sure you try to, get your name in line as early as you can, but to let them know, yes, you would, can you tell me when your VBS is? I will come the day after and pick up all the material you're wanting to get rid of and then have your VBS set for later in the summer so that you can use
Mhm.
that material later on.
And too, similar in that same vein, there are lots of Facebook groups. I'm in tons of Facebook groups, like VBS Facebook groups. Since we started Awana, I've joined some different Awana Facebook groups.
Mhm.
And some of those are specifically for buying, selling, trading
Mhm.
materials.
Mhm.
And so people, will post their materials, their spare materials, or things that they, didn't
Mhm.
use, or things that they've used and are ready to pass on. And a lot of times it's like, just pay shipping, or I'm in this area, come pick it up. And so being a part of those Facebook groups on social media, you can see, all these opportunities and all these,
Mhm.
ways that you can get access to materials for much less,
Mhm.
than buying it new.
Right.
So,
Well,
mhm,
and that's something that, again, I did often is I went to bookstores and stores at the end of seasons to
mm,
find things that they had on clearance and to find things that they had on sale. And
mhm,
I would just use them for another year. Even
mhm,
some of the specialty even some of those, special lessons and special studies that might be done,
mhm,
I might not be doing it when everyone else was doing it, or I might be a little off of the timeline, but if I could find those things on sale, those resources on sale on clearance, I would try to purchase any of those that I could. A lot of times, even if I could only find a partial resource, like
mm,
for example, if I could only find the leader guides for a specific thing, I would still pick those up so that I had them for those events that I was talking about earlier. If I
mhm,
needed to do a special Wednesday night study, or if I needed to do something special, even if I didn't have the entire year's worth of that material, I would just try to pick up those leader guides when I could catch them and when I could
mhm,
find them on sale. And so that way that I would have them again to be able to pull from when I did need them. I'm sure that I've mentioned before that I used to work on staff for a denomination. And one of the things that I found was that a lot of publishers would send me items to let me know about material that they had. So I would have all of these books and all of these resources that were just sent to me to be able to review, to be able to recommend. And at some point, my office was just too full of material. And so I would contact churches that I knew had a tighter budget and often offer those resources to them because again I just didn't have the space to store it all
mhm,
year after year after year. So one of the things I always recommend to churches too is to talk with your denominational leadership,
mhm,
find out your headquarters, your state associations, those types of things that you might have in the area. Check with them and talk with them and
mhm,
let them know about your ministry and your budget and your struggles with getting material. And a lot of times they can connect you with people that are going to have some resources and some things to give you.
mhm.
Because again, there's only so much storage space that you have. And so after a few years, there's just so much to find space for that you have to find ways to distribute and to give to people. And so that's always a really helpful way to find resources when you're needing to. One of the other things that you've talked a lot about that I know has been incredibly helpful for a lot of readers is when we can find things on Pinterest or on,
Yeah.
ideas for crafts or ideas for activities on social media pages or on these kind of things. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times we can find ways to supplement when we don't have
Mhm,
the resources to be able to come up with some different ideas and different things that you can do to be able to have these activities and these games with the kids without necessarily having to have all of the big, huge resources.
mhm,
And one of the things that I always found really helpful is that I would go through the dollar stores or
mm,
Walmart type stores, those kind of stores very often, and look for sale items throughout the year of those things
mhm,
that helped me create items.
mhm.
Having craft sticks, you can do so much with craft sticks, so many puzzles, so many, different kinds of games and activities that you
Mhm,
can do with those, and they're so inexpensive. But finding those types of items, places, I would often try to find any kind of cubes or any kind of balls or any kind of, little things that I could use in a classroom that I could find very inexpensively. And I could make some of those big fancy, inflatable things that they have in cubes and different kinds of game things can be
yeah.
made with just blow up beach ball and a Sharpie.
Yeah. Yes.
There's lots of things that they may not last as long and they may not be as, as fancy, but a lot of those kinds of items, you can find ways online that can help you create
Mhm.
game items and different kinds of activities and different kinds of puzzles and books and things like that with a
Mhm.
lot of very inexpensive craft type items that you can pick up in
Mhm.
stores when you can catch them on sale. So
Mhm. Yep.
there are also some other things that I have found over the years that I needed to do to be able to supplement my ministry when I really didn't have a very strong budget. The first is to talk with adult Sunday school classes.
Mhm.
Often, adult Sunday school classes are very willing to help sponsor a classroom, will help sponsor a child. So, if you're looking for budget to help kids go to camp, or if you're looking for more budget to be able to help with Vacation Bible School, if you can find ways to connect adult Sunday school classes to different classrooms in your preschool and children's ministry, a lot of times they can be adopted by the adult
Mhm.
class, and the adult class will bring together the money that's needed to be able to purchase the supplies and the items that are needed for that classroom. So many times, if I wanted to make sure that we had Bibles for our first graders or for our preschoolers, or if I wanted to be able to help a family send their kids to camp that couldn't afford it and we didn't have the budget to be able to do that through the church, I would often go to the adult Sunday school classes and ask for their help with that. And so many times they are so incredibly willing as long as they know that you have the need. And so they
Mhm.
just need to be aware that you have the need. That's why, again, a lot of times I would put up a wish list of things that we would need for the ministry and see if we
Mhm.
can have some donations of crayons and pencils and paper, and just sort of like let the church know that these were the things
Mhm.
that we needed for the children's ministry. And I think too, when you let them know that there is not really a budget for these items, but these are things that that you need, again, it makes more
Mhm.
people aware of what it takes to run a ministry. So
Yeah.
a lot of times, especially if you're doing an event like Vacation Bible School and you're going to have more kids, so you need more resources to put up that list and say,
Mhm.
hey, I need this many egg cartons, but we also need boxes of crayons and we need glue and we need, all of these types
Mhm.
of things that people could help donate to,
Mhm.
that could be just a huge help for your budget to ask people if they could do that.
Well, and one thing too with the wish list that I've seen really probably more classroom teachers do this, but people do this for their children's ministry as well, is to do Amazon wish lists.
Yeah.
That way, you can send it out digitally, you can put it on social
Mhm.
media, you can send it out to an email. And that way, people know exactly what it is that you need, exactly what it is that you want. And they can just go and, click, click, click,
Yeah.
and then it automatically gets shipped to the church. And so I've seen Amazon wish lists get utilized
Yeah.
in this way to help support ministries
Right.
and to help get, again, exactly what you want. Because you can say, okay, I want, Crayola markers
Uh-huh.
and, well meaning, people in your church are like, here's a pack of Sharpies. And you're like, that's
Yes.
the opposite of what I need.
Right, right, right.
Ah.
There just are so many great ways now to be able to do those kinds of things to get the church involved in helping you be
Mhm.
able to provide for the ministry. And so it's letting them know. I feel like you don't want to do this just constantly, because I think
Right,
the more that
right.
people hear that constant request,
Right,
it
right.
does begin to just become so commonplace that people don't think
Mhm,
about it anymore. But if
mhm,
you can have certain times of year, like before Vacation Bible School, before the fall kickoff, those times, maybe,
mhm,
for the Christmas, event, the things that you're going to need, just
mhm,
for certain times of the year, I think is a lot more effective. But it's definitely something that you can ask the congregation to help you be able to do. The other thing that a lot of churches will do to help add to that budget need is to have children's ministry or preschool ministry fundraisers.
mhm,
And there's obviously a billion ways you can do these, because there's just a billion ways out there for anybody to be able to fundraise, to be able to
mhm,
do, bake sales, or to be able to do things where you are offering services for, you can come in and rake leaves or do that kind of thing. And I have done that. I've typically done that more for helping kids raise money for camp or
Mhm.
for, an event like that than I
Mhm.
have for the basic budget itself. But I do know
Mhm.
a lot of churches that have done that just to help with their preschool and children's ministry budget.
Mhm. Well, and two, one of the things that we were talking about a little bit before we, started talking about this in the recording, um, the opposite side of that, because I'm in a church that doesn't do a whole lot of fundraisers,
Right.
with the thought process being that sometimes fundraisers can take away people's ability to serve in other areas or their willingness to serve in other areas.
Right.
If they're like, well, I'm, donating all this time to the bake sale or the car wash or the whatever,
Mhm.
I'm not going to take on serving in this other area because I'm already serving in the fundraiser.
Right.
Or, financially, they're like, well, I'm just not going to give, my same amount that I normally would give on Sunday morning, like in my tithe or with my offering. Instead, I'm going to take half of that and give it to the bake sale.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that you, like, financially, you don't have a good sense of like where money is needed and
Mhm.
where money is going in the church, if that makes sense.
It does.
And so part of that thought process is that, okay, if instead of doing fundraisers, if we budget for this
Right.
and we ask people to just give as normal and it becomes a part of our budget,
Right.
then we have a better grasp and a better understanding of where our money is going and where money is needed.
Right.
And so that's, not that you can't do fundraisers or that,
Right.
but that is some of the reasons why, like in our church, we really don't do a lot of fundraisers
Right.
because we feel like we can get a better representation of where money's going and where money's needed if
Yeah.
we are tracking that closely through our budgets.
Right.
So,
I think that comes full circle back to where we started and us talking about making sure that we have the documentation, the
mhm,
data that shows what we need for our ministry realistically to
mhm,
run. And
mhm,
I think that is how
yeah,
we make sure that we plead for the case of this needs to be a budgeted ministry. We need to
mhm,
have a budget, however small or however large it might be, but
mhm,
that you have all of that documentation so that you can see this is where this money comes from, this is where this money goes, this is what we need to be able to function, so that the church realizes if we want this large of a VBS event, then we need to
mm,
have the budget to be able to have this large of a VBS event. If we want to help children be able to go to camp, then we really need to have a budget to help children go to camp.
mhm.
But I also know the realistic expectations of some churches, they just don't
Yeah,
see things that way. And
right,
if you are
right.
serving in one of those churches, then you still have the responsibility to do all of
Mhm,
these things without having the support of that budget.
mhm.
And so we just wanted to encourage you to let you know it can be done.
Yes,
It's
yes.
hard and it is a struggle and it is something that you can't take on by yourself and that you
Mhm,
shouldn't take on by yourself,
mhm,
but that you do need to be able to be prepared so that you can help your ministry grow and thrive and do that through sometimes having to find unique ways to find the financing to be able to do it or to find the resources that you need. But there are a lot of options out there for ways that you can really do children's ministry well, even if
mhm.
it's on a super tight budget.
Well, and two, because ultimately, I mean, yes, we want our teachers to be resource and equipped to do what they need to do and to teach the Bible well. And really, if you've got teachers who are teaching the Bible well,
Right.
who are loving on kids and investing in kids,
Mhm.
then like you've got what you need.
Right.
You've got what you need. Whenever your teachers are equipped, whenever they are, building relationships with kids and caring about them. And when kids come to church and feel loved, I mean, that is more valuable than any bell or whistle or,
Mhm.
lights or,
Yeah.
fancy decorations or anything. And
Yes.
so that's what matters
Mhm.
is, the investment that your people are making in kids, and then just teaching them the Bible, teaching them the gospel, and just implanting God's word into their little hearts.
Right, right. And that's really what our calling is. It's really what we have
Mhm.
been tasked to do with our ministries. And so we hope that this information has been helpful. We hope that maybe it spurred some, just not only maybe giving you some ideas of something different that you can use, but also just to let you know that you are not alone.
Mhm.
Not every church has the budget that we think that a lot of churches have, and so we wanted you to know you are not alone in this, and we are encouraging you and just rooting for you as you work to try to minister to your families and to your children. As always, we ask that you would like and subscribe and all the things. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.